Welcome to a new NHL edition of Inside the Lab, just our second episode and already a name change, but Inside the Lab is much more representative, I think, of the goal here. And with this show, just kind of exactly what we're doing is going inside the lab. So credit Jonathan Bales for that improvement. I'm your host, Joe Holka, analyst here at FantasyLabs. We're recording Friday night for the Saturday, February 18th NHL slate, but much more importantly, Sean Newsham, aka PSU Fans 2, is joining me again today, just a staple of the NHL DFS community for quite a few years now. Sean, how are you, man?
I'm not too bad. I'm sitting here just enjoying the lovely weather outside here in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's quite nice out here today. We're above freezing level, I think.
It would have been nice to be in Florida today, right? Or some of the guys I think are out there. So
I mean, yeah, we just didn't make the cut to Florida. We had to stay in our luxurious places that we're currently in. It's not snowing here, so I think we're both taking that as a win for me. Is it snowing there where you're at?
Yeah, it is actually. So it's fantastic. Not being.
I guess I'm beating you currently.
Yeah, but I mean, I saw the place that they're staying at, and it looks pretty terrible. So I think we're doing okay.
Yeah, it looks like they're really slumming it down there in Florida this week. So, hopefully they'll have a good time, and hopefully we can have a good time here with all you guys.
Yeah, good stuff. Like we talked about before, the NHL product at FantasyLabs launched in December, but I think this show is just going to be extremely valuable for people just to kind of get some slate-specific information, but still get a better idea of how we're going to use our tools here at FantasyLabs for the NHL product. And we're going to be able to share our screen along the way to kind of give you guys a better idea of what we're talking about as we kind of jump into the slate. So as we kind of get into it, I just wanted to start on the goalie page tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And you go up here to the NHL tab and then starting goalies. So as you can see, this is still from tonight's slate. So we'll switch over the date to tomorrow, Saturday slate. And obviously we talked about it before, but these are going to kind of fill out throughout the day as things kind of happen with morning skate and whatnot. So for right now, these are unconfirmed, but we still have our money line numbers here. So Sean, is there anything that kind of stands out to you, like just kind of at first glance? I think some of the biggest favorites, I know Minnesota is pretty heavily favored, San Jose, so pretty standard.
Yeah, most of your usual suspects are pretty heavily favored tomorrow. I expect the over-under in the Toronto game to be pretty high. Toronto yields a lot of shots, and they also take a lot of shots. So usually the Toronto games are high in pace, and they have decent totals, and they're usually decent ones to attack from a DFS perspective. Like you said, San Jose is in a really good spot. I mean, San Jose is generally in a good spot against Arizona. Even on the road, I still like them. I know normally you'd want to attack guys at home, but this should be a good spot. And the Vancouver-Calgary game is sort of a nice game where you should be able to find some nice value with Vancouver guys and even Calgary guys. I know in the past there's been some full line brawls in those games. So a lot of the time those two teams play pretty dirty, and there can be a lot of penalties and power plays in those games.
Yeah, I just actually finished up an article kind of looking at some of those home road splits for some specific teams. And Vancouver hasn't been great this year, but they have been a lot better at home. So that's something just to kind of think about there. Let's jump over to models and then kind of get a better idea of some of the other Vegas type implications for goaltender. So what we want to do is switch over our date to the 18th. And one thing that we were talking about tomorrow's slate, the main slate only has 8 games, and there's going to be some games throughout the day. So make sure when you're on the models page that you sort for the slate that you are doing, or you're going to get another 3 teams. So let's go head over to goalie just to kind of get a better idea of some of the Vegas stuff. So we talked about San Jose, so it makes sense that Martin Jones is at the top of my model. So we kind of sort by money line here just to kind of give us a better idea of some of the top favorites. You can see that, yeah, San Jose is the top favorite, and then Minnesota followed by LA, Chicago, and Toronto. So so as far as like some of their opponents, like do you see anyone off the bat that shoots quite a bit or kind of doesn't shoot quite a bit, someone that maybe we should avoid?
As I talked about earlier, you can see a lot of shots in that Toronto game. That Toronto game is generally a spot where there's going to be a decent amount of shots on both sides. So if you look at the goaltenders here, if you look in the saves column, saves per game, you can sort of see which teams give up a decent amount of shots. So like, for example, Vancouver and Arizona, they generally will see more shots per game than any other team on this slate. So it comes down to a spot with like Ryan Miller or Markstrom, whoever starts for Vancouver. They might end up seeing a lot more shots than other goalies, and they're also a favorite, or it's going to be a really coin flip game. It's going to be a really close game. That could be a spot where you could find a good value goalie that I believe is even cheaper than most of your other options. Yeah, as you can see on DraftKings, Ryan Miller is $7,300, and I think Markstrom's right around the same price. So whoever starts for Vancouver should be one of your cheapest goalies, and they have a possibility to see more saves than anyone and possibly get a win.
Yeah, definitely. So he could definitely be an option, even kind of on DraftKings in particular. He's an 80% bargain rating too. So that's something that I look at, just kind of trying to make those decisions. Like Devin Dubnyk, if you decide to go that route, is a 95% bargain rating on DraftKings. But then on FanDuel, he's much more expensive. So that's going to move him down a little bit in the model. But I think today we're going to start by looking for some value. And I think a good way to do that is on the trends page. So I'm going to bring you guys over there now to trends. And as you can see, these are all of my trends, but I do have a lineup builder one that I like to use kind of to find value. So I think this is something that we're going to do quite a bit of, is just kind of leave these wide open and kind of constrict a little bit from there, depending on the slate or depending on what kind of player we're after. So I think what we should do today is go over the team filters, because that's something that I like to use in trends if we're going to target specific teams. So Sean, is there any teams that kind of stand out on this slate that we should get filtered by kind of right off the bat?
Some of the teams I like for tomorrow are San Jose, as we discussed, Minnesota, Vancouver, and I like both sides of the Toronto and Ottawa game.
Okay.
And those are just a small amount of the teams I like for tomorrow night that should produce some decent shot totals and some decent value.
Was there anyone else that was pretty high up in like their implied total that we could add in here just to kind of keep our range a little bit larger? I don't have the Vegas lines in front of me right this second, but you might.
I believe that if you scroll down a little bit, you could put in the Calgary as well.
Okay.
They could be a decent spot too. And then I believe
we can always kind of constrict from there, but it's nice
Correct.
to start a little bit more broad. So we'll put Calgary in. So that's a good majority of the games. So you can see the current matches are going to switch right away. But let's look to defensemen, because we spent a little bit more time on centers and wingers last show. So we'll filter out just defensemen now. And then we're going to go to the shots per month filter and just look at defensemen that are in the top 80 percentile over the past month. So that's going to narrow things down quite a bit right away.
Correct.
Carlson, Wideman, Burns, and Hamilton. So Wideman's an interesting one, though, at just 3,600. Make sure we're on we're actually on FanDuel. I'll switch over to DraftKings, since most of the time we're talking about DraftKings on this show, but it's not going to change our results too much. Wideman's 3K on DK. So
correct.
And he is, let's see, in the 83rd percentile in shots over the past month, and he's actually in the 70th percentile in block shots for the past month. So his peripherals look pretty good at 3K. I don't know about you.
Yeah, the only thing you got to look out for there is if you look at his time on ice and his minutes percentage, he's not very high minutes, so he's currently not getting many minutes, as you see also with the game log. However, when he's on the ice, he's been producing. So the different thing that you see tonight with these games that we have set up with these teams compared to what we did the other night when we ran a similar type of filter, the other night we found a bunch of guys in the 5 to 4,500 range that were all really good producers of peripheral stats. However, tomorrow night, as you can clearly see by this, if you look at some of the teams, that's about a third of the teams, I believe, on the slate for tomorrow night, or a little bit over that. And you only have 4 guys that show up with these type of peripherals as a defenseman. Brent Burns is obviously great, and same with Erik Karlsson. One that you see on here that you don't always see is Dougie Hamilton. Dougie Hamilton hasn't gotten tons of minutes this year. They sort of reeled him in at like 20 minutes a game, 21 minutes a game, I would say, maybe even slightly less. But whenever Dougie Hamilton is on the ice, he shoots the puck a lot, and he also blocks quite a few shots. So Dougie Hamilton's a guy that if you don't use the trends page, you might not find someone like him pop up without knowing that.
Yeah, I mean, 5,500, like anytime you can pay up for Brent Burns, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that, but he's kind of in a tier of his own. So once you kind of get back to some of the other options, like if you can get a guy like Hamilton who is in the 87th percentile, but also is in nearly the 90th percentile for block shots at just 5,500, and those numbers are over the past month, so it's pretty recent. And that's, I think, is really important. And with the trends page, it's nice to filter out players like this. Like, I'm not super concerned with plus minus type stuff when looking at that. I'm more looking at this kind of to filter out some value type options. So let's look at quickly center and wing, and then maybe we just go back over to models and kind of look position by position today as well.
Sounds good.
Okay, so quite a bit of wild players are popping up here, which is not too surprising. Parise is always one of the guys that shoots a lot. So we got Parise up top. Let's sort it by salary, see if there's any really cheap guys here. Couple Vancouver guys, so that makes sense with what you were looking at before, and some Calgary guys too. So that game might be one to target in general, just for some guys that might be mispriced.
Yeah, it might be a mispriced thing. One thing we look at for a lot of the time is we look for mispricing. Whenever you go through lineups and you look for things, you try to find things that are mispriced. One thing I found earlier in the month, and Joe and I had talked about it, was the Nashville skaters for a good couple of weeks were mispriced every night. Guys like James Neal and Philip Forsberg, who shoot the puck a lot, were priced about $5,500, and it was really low for what they were doing. They should have been up in the $7,000 to $7,500 salary range, but they were in the $5,500 salary range, and they were great guys to play every night. So as you see down here, you got some good value with both sides of the Vancouver and Calgary game are popping here a little bit, and a lot of guys on Ottawa too. Someone like Josh Levo just got called up, and he's been seizing his chances for Toronto recently. Not getting tons of minutes, but he's playing on the second power play, and he's forcing himself into more and more situations because of how well he's been playing recently. As you can see, he's got back-to-back 5-shot performances in minimal amount of ice time. So he's the type of guy that if you need a complete punt, he's a viable option.
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that's producing, and the coaches are going to be seeing that as well. I mean, this is a guy that's been playing extremely well in the American League all year, and hockey is a little bit different than a lot of sports because we do have that advantage of being able to attack guys that are getting called up. So correct. I think it's really valuable to look at how things are going in the American League, or if someone gets called up, just do a quick search to see what kind of player that is. Because sometimes you're being called up for a specific role, or sometimes guys are getting called up to be a goal scorer. And if you're going to get called up to have a significant role and your price just isn't going to reflect that, I think that those are guys that have a lot of value. We talked about Ken Augustino last show, but looking at a guy like Wheel on Philadelphia as well, he's a guy that won a Calder Cup 2 years ago in LA system, and now he's playing in Philadelphia system, and he's been just destroying the American League, and he's like 3K. So like you roll him out, at least you have a chance of a guy that you know has a lot of skill and has a little bit of upside if you are going to kind of go punt ranging.
Yeah, and last night I know for Los Angeles, and he's still on the first line for now, but I would wait and double check tomorrow on the lines page. But Adrian Kempe was called up for the Kings, and he was playing on the top line with Andrei Kopitar and Tyler Toffoli. Well, you put someone on a line with those two and he skates with them, those are great line mates, and they can really create some space for you to get some shots. I know he had 2 or 3 shots. He had a really good scoring chance that he was robbed in. And even at the end of the game, they were down 2 goals with an empty net, and he was actually on the ice as a $2,500 punt play for LA. So you can definitely find guys like that to get called up that won't be priced properly, especially at the beginning.
You like to see that too, because I remember we were talking about when Casilla got called up for the Ducks earlier in the year. It was like, played him on the 4th line, had like 8 minutes, and they sent him right back down to the American League. So, I mean, what's he supposed to do with that? But in situations like you're describing, when they actually do get an opportunity, like those are the situations that matter for DFS. So,
correct.
Let's jump back over to models. And okay, so Letang has been pretty underpriced on DraftKings lately, but let's jump into centers first. We'll just go.
You got to go back to tomorrow's.
Tomorrow's
slate. I do believe Letang. He had a big game last night, though. He had about 9.5 DraftKings points. I know I played him in a lineup, and he had, I believe, 3 assists, 5 shots, and they lost a couple defensemen. So he even saw his minutes increase a bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the top percentile in shots per game and blocks per game, like very close to the top. And he's not priced anywhere near like a guy like Brent Burns, and he's pretty much producing like him the last little while. So speaking of, Brent Burns, let's start at defense, just because like it's a good place to kind of look at some of the top tier options, in my opinion.
Agreed.
We've done some research there on paying up for defensemen, and it is a pretty viable strategy in both cash games and tournaments. So Are you paying up for Brent Burns?
There's a decent possibility I play up for Brent Burns. If you guys haven't checked out, Joe had a great article on Brent Burns as a player profile article. You guys should check it out. We have it up on the FantasyLabs page. I believe it's one of the most recent articles, so check that out. I know Joe will have some more input because he did an entire article and did a ton of research on Brent Burns, but he's the best player in DFS hockey. Nobody's better. He produces so many peripheral stats. He's second in the league in shots, I believe, right now. He might be first. I think Ovechkin passed him the other day. But just look at those game logs. Look at what you get out of him. You have the upside. You have the consistency. I mean, you're never getting less than 2.5 points. You just don't see that from guys in the NHL at all. So there's a really good possibility I'll play Brent Burns now. And after that, you see Erik Karlsson right below him. And then below him, you got guys like Jake Muzzin and Johnny Boychuk. And these are guys that put up peripheral stats that are in decent matchups that are right in the 4 to 5K range. So if you need guys that are going to do that, look at what Jake Muzzin does. Look at those shot totals that Jake Muzzin has in the last 10 games. He had an assist the other night. He has a 5-shot, 5-shot, 4-shot game. His stats were a little bit hurt before those 10 to 15 games that we have shown you right now because he was getting less minutes. They were trying to get him a little bit of rest, but you're looking at a guy that blocks a shot or two a game, gets 2 or 3 shots a game. On the power play, they like to funnel a lot of shots to him on the top power play unit, and he's a great guy to play in a good spot.
Yeah, LA has been really good this year. I mean, just in general, and I mean, his price, especially on DraftKings, has been pretty crazy, honestly, for the amount of peripherals he's kind of rolling out, I think, but is there anyone else? I mean, this range of just like kind of like the 5K range, like we talked about it last week, it'd be nice to play like 5 or 6 of these guys sometimes. So,
yeah, I mean, there's a ton of guys on the list. I guess so. What I'll do instead of telling you guys someone that I would play, someone that I probably would avoid in general on a lot of slates is John Klingberg. If you look down John Klingberg, I know he's been doing a little bit more, but he doesn't shoot the puck a lot over the course of the season. He's been shooting more, but if you look what we have, he doesn't take a ton of shots. You're looking at, 26 shots there. There's about 15 games. He's averaging about less than 1.5. His price point was actually earlier in the year well over 6,500, I believe, because he's on such an explosive offense in Dallas. But when you can play guys like Jake Muzzin or Johnny Boychuk or any other of those guys in that range, they're going to be more consistent for you over the long run because of what they do peripheral-wise, whereas someone like John Klingberg just doesn't shoot as much as them.
Yeah, I mean, he's in the 68th percentile. He's not a guy that's ever really going to pop in trends when I'm trying to look for value. So he's not really someone I'm considering on most nights, even though, like you said, they do have a good offense, but there's just so many other options that are just more appealing kind of from a floor and a ceiling perspective for me.
Correct.
Anyone else that you definitely kind of aren't playing that kind of might be a little bit more popular, you think, or you think you're good to move on to forwards?
I think one more person that we can move on is someone that we just talked about. Jake Muzzin's really good. I probably wouldn't play Drew Doughty. Drew Doughty's one of the top 3 defensemen in the league, probably, maybe top 5. But he just does similar things, and he doesn't shoot as much as someone like Jake Muzzin. So when I have the opportunity to take Jake Muzzin and get $1,000 off in my salary on DraftKings, I'm going to take Jake Muzzin. If you look at these logs, excluding the Winnipeg game all the way back a month ago, you're looking at a guy that gets the minutes but doesn't necessarily put a lot of shots on net compared to his teammate. So if you can play his teammate for $1,000 less, get the same power play time, get a lot of ice time as well, I'm going to take that savings all day.
Yeah, the consistency has been there from a points perspective. Obviously, he's a really good player, but when you're relying on that and you don't have that kind of safety net with the shots, it's just kind of a little bit more risky, in my opinion, from a DFS perspective.
Correct.
So let's move over to centers. I think we have a pretty good idea of some of the plays at D. Austin Matthews, I mean, it's not surprising to see him at the top of the model. I mean, he has been just going on a tear lately. Toronto's playing better. The young guys are getting better, I think, is the important thing. So,
yeah, the young guys have been fantastic. I believe, actually, there's been one person in the NHL this year that has a shot on goal in every single game, and it is Austin Matthews. Yeah. Ovechkin did not have a shot last week in one of his games, and that was the first time. But Austin Matthews, as you see, one of the keys with centers is a lot of the centers are your general playmakers. So generally what they do is they don't take a lot of shots because they're setting their teammates up for the shots. There's about 5 to 10, however, that are sort of, they buck that trend. And we'll even talk about this a little more with someone I wouldn't play. But if you look at guys like Austin Matthews, Logan Couture, Jeff Carter, a.k.a. the guys that pop in our models, and even Nazem Kadri, these guys take a lot of shots, especially compared to other centers. When you look at them, their price is fair, but the differences between like 5K centers compared to the 7K centers is some of the 5K centers don't take a lot of shots.
Yep.
If you look down, I don't even know how far we'd have to scroll, but someone like Joe Thornton. Joe Thornton is one of the best centers in the league. He's a little bit older now, obviously, but Joe Thornton doesn't shoot the puck. I know up until 2 or 3 games ago, he had 3 goals. So let's see, the Boston game. It took him till that Boston game. He has 3 goals on the year before that. Mm-hmm. That was the first goal he actually scored on a goaltender in the Boston game. He had 3 goals on the season, and only 2 of them went in the net. And they were both empty netters. And the other one was they called a penalty shot with an empty net because he was on a breakaway. Yeah. So someone like Joe Thornton is only really a GPP play if you can stack him with his line mates, because look at that. You're talking about a guy that averages a shot a game or under a shot per game, just doesn't produce the peripheral stats that you need for consistency. So even when he hits his upside, you look at that New Jersey game, his upside is only about 6.5. Right. And he really has he has a floor of 0 because he just doesn't take enough shots to really produce for you.
Yeah, so if you have a player that's got a floor like that and his ceiling isn't relatively high, like he's definitely not really in play most nights in cash. And even in GPPs, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense when you can play a guy at the same price that has a much higher ceiling and definitely a higher floor. So I mean,
Jeff, you just look at that game log, he had 3 games of 0 points. That's just not something you can really stomach in cash games.
Definitely. So yeah, I mean, Austin Matthews, anytime I think we talked about this last time too, but anytime someone is that far ahead in their rating, it's someone that you definitely have to consider.
Correct. Yeah. What I do with the ratings a lot of time, guys, is if you look at the ratings and you, like I said, always go with your gut and use the tools to help you create your lineup and help you with your style. But if there's a guy that maybe you weren't really thinking about, but he really pops in the model or whatever model you create, you come up with, make sure you check him up and make sure you look more in depth into him to find out why he's popping so high in whatever the model is that you're using on that day, because there's generally a reason for it.
Yeah, definitely. Let's see. Is there anyone else here before you want to move on to wingers now?
A couple of my favorite guys. I love Nazem Kadri. Nazem Kadri is one of the biggest pests in the league, but he's a really good center, and he's playing really well for Toronto. And as you can see, his bargain rating on DraftKings is fantastic, and he shoots the puck a lot, especially for centers. And that Toronto team has been really, really good lately. He's playing with, I believe lately it's been Leo Komarov and William Nylander. And William Nylander's a great
Let's bring up the lines page and see who's – because, I mean, if we're considering Matthews as a guy to target, it does make sense to kind of look at the lines page and see where Kadri is at as well.
So if you see this, and make sure you guys check in tomorrow for any updated lines. I know that Toronto is one of the teams that's more stagnant with their lines. They don't change them as frequently as other teams. But, yeah, as you can see, you have him playing with Leo Komarov and William Nylander. And you can see both of them are relatively cheap guys. And you can make stacks out of this team in GPPs, and it can really work out well for you. And even Austin Matthews is playing with Connor Brown and Zach Hyman, who are both relatively cheap guys, and they're both really solid players as well. And if you look here on the power play, Komarov and Nylander skate together, and then Kadri actually skates on the top power play unit in between the line of Van Riemsdyk, Bozak, and Marner, who are aligned in even strength. So there's plenty of different ways that you can stack Toronto tomorrow, because you have different groupings that play together on the power play and even strength. So there's different ways that you can attack that if you want to.
Yeah, from more of like a correlation standpoint, playing Kadri and Nylander is nice because they're full strength together. But if you do want exposure to Matthews and Kadri, you could go after like a Matthews-Nylander stack because they play on the power play together. And hopefully you still get a little bit of that value from Kadri just by playing Nylander. So
correct. And as you can see with the shots per game, Nylander takes more shots than anyone in that second power play unit. So they like to funnel a lot of the action towards him.
Definitely. Let's jump back and look at some wingers before we check out kind of some stacks.
Sounds good. You can talk about one of my favorite players when we come to the wingers, I'm sure.
Yeah. Who's that?
One of my favorite players in the league is Mike Hoffman. I love once you click back to the games for tomorrow, you'll see him pop up, I'm sure. He takes a lot of shots. He's been one of my favorite players. I know a couple years ago he led the league in even strength goals. He had like 28 goals at even strength, which is just an insane number. And he only had one at the power play because Ottawa botches his minutes and what he does so badly. And I just love Mike Hoffman's game. Looks like he doesn't pop very much, but if you look at Mike Hoffman, he plays on the second, third, first line, and he rotates a little bit. But you got these type of games where he's taking 7 shots, 5 shots. I know earlier in the year, I think he had a 9-shot game. And he's one of the guys that generally you'll find him as lower owned because sometimes he skates on the third line with Pajot. I think recently he got a bump up to the top line with Kyle Turris, who's another solid play tomorrow. And he takes a lot of shots, and on the power play, they try to funnel a lot of one-timers through him on the wing.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Thornton and kind of his inconsistency, but if you're going to go after like a GPP type player, this is the kind of spike you want to see, like those 7-shot games, the 5-shot games. And like you said, they are trying to feature him on the power play for one-timers, so there's going to be an opportunity for some power play points there as well.
Exactly.
So Parise, he's someone that pops quite a bit, but he hasn't been scoring goals lately at a very high rate for definitely what they're paying him for. But kind of, I guess, so shots perspective, he is a guy that has a nice floor. Yeah,
Parise has sort of been an interesting person recently because they've moved him around the lineup, and Minnesota's been moving their lineups around a lot. He still takes a lot of shots, but he's not been getting like the full power play time. His minutes have been down. As you can see, though, his shots have been pretty consistent. So he's one of those guys that's been sort of weird recently because he's not been playing in his normal role. He's playing in the third line, which I think has helped him because he's getting lesser competition against him. So you're seeing more shots from him, but he's giving that up at a sacrifice of minutes per game. So he's been an interesting guy because the Minnesota team has been really good lately. And in recent years, he's a guy you would always attack. But this year, he's sort of like kept people at bay due to where he's been playing in his minutes, but he's still producing at a pretty good clip.
Yeah, I like Parise just because he blocks shots too, and that's not something you get from wingers all the time. So
correct.
You get a lot more blocks from your centers and your defensemen primarily, but Parise is up there in their top percentile in block shots most of the time as well. So correct. Let's take a look. So, yeah, definitely some San Jose guys, Toronto guys, like pretty common theme. Even like some of the Vegas totals we were looking at, a lot of these teams are kind of popping in the model too, which is nice to see.
Yeah, a lot of these guys will be similar and they'll be popping because, like, if you have a good matchup, a lot of the time it will show in what you're doing. Joe Pavelski's a great play. Tyler Seguin still drives me nuts. They moved him off as center on DraftKings because center is so hard to find people that are good. And at wing, he's just a dime a dozen. There's so many guys at the 7K range that aren't any worse or better than him. But like you got guys like Michael Frolik. That second line for Calgary has been really good this year with him, Backlund, and Matthew Tkachuk, Keith's son. And you can find them a bit more of a value. If you look through this, he has a shot in all games except one, and he's really producing decently for Calgary. And he's not at the 7K price range that you might be looking at.
Yeah, like that range in general is kind of nice at winger, like just like the Patrick Sharp, Frolik's of the world that are going to shoot almost in the 90th percentile, but you can get them at lower than even 5K on DraftKings. I think that kind of paying down sometimes for winger is definitely a viable strategy.
Yeah, a lot of the time you'll see guys, their pricing is generally mispriced when they're not scoring goals.
Yeah.
Not scoring goals is generally just a cold streak, and it's just unlucky and variance. So when you got guys that are in the 90th, 95th percentile that aren't scoring goals, that's generally just bad luck. So they're mispriced because they haven't been putting up the goal totals, aka their points on DraftKings and FanDuel haven't been as high, but they're shooting just as much as those guys that are in the 7K range. So you might see those guys are going to start regressing to the mean where they're going to get up to that 7K type of scoring, but you can get them at a 2K discount.
Yeah, we talk about regression quite a bit in NFL, positive, negative regression. I think it's definitely applicable in NHL as well because goal scorers, they've probably been scoring goals their whole life, and a cold streak, especially if they're still kind of maintaining their shot volume, when it does change, it's going to change quick. And those guys are pretty streaky in general. So you might be able to take advantage of their price that's been down because they haven't been scoring goals. And when they do start scoring goals again, they could be a guy to attack.
Yeah, I rode James Neal hot streak earlier in the year for about 2-3 weeks, and it really worked out well because he was under-owned every night, but he was shooting 5 times a game, and he just wasn't scoring. And all of a sudden, he started putting a couple in the net, and it really helped me for about a 2-3 week period where he was under-owned, underpriced, and I was getting 6 shots a game, a goal, and an assist. And all of a sudden, I'm having this guy at 5% owned, and it was great.
Definitely. All right, well, let's jump into some stacks. One of the things that we have in models is our stacks builder tool. So you can change it by center, winger, defenseman, how many you want there, even in goalie. And for this one, let's add in the full lines and power play and sort by rating. And we'll just go with a standard center, winger, defense stack and see kind of what pops here.
Sounds good. Yeah, and like this is a great tool that you guys should all utilize. It helps you. It can really help you show some correlation between plays, and it can help you show what guys are projected well for the next day, and it really can help you win GPPs or even cash games. As you can see, some of the people we had been talking about over the last hour popped in Michael Backlund, Michael Frolik, and Dougie Hamilton as one of the top stack options that we have for tomorrow. And look at that salary price. Yep. You're only paying $15.6K for that. If you do stuff like that, it really opens up guys like Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson that you might want to play later. And then if you look down a little bit more, you see the San Jose stack with Joe Thornton and Joe Pavelski and Brent Burns. Now, however, like we had just discussed, that's more of a GPP type lineup because you might not want Joe Thornton. So, for example, if I was going to run that in cash games, I might use the Pavelski and Brent Burns part, but instead of playing Joe Thornton, I might replace him with someone like Michael Backlund from Calgary and do things like that.
Yeah, let's see what happens when we switch this center. Let's take out centers completely and add in 2 wings and see kind of what we get here.
Yeah, and as you can see, it's
Dallas guys. Yep.
Yep, you see a complete change for the most part, except for one constant stayed there. Is that Calgary line just flipped out Backlund for Tkachuk, and it even has 2 defensemen. So clearly our models really like Calgary tomorrow night because Frolik, Tkachuk are in there with Giordano and Hamilton, which means that it's clearly a well-liked stack for them. So if you see things like this, this is really like a spot. Maybe you weren't thinking heavily about Calgary tomorrow night, and I know even at the beginning we were talking about playing Vancouver goalie Ryan Miller or Markstrom, but maybe after looking at all this stuff, you reassess your thoughts for the day and you look at who's rated well, how the model is popping out players, and clearly the model really likes Calgary, so maybe I'll reassess playing the Vancouver goalie, and instead I'll be playing some Calgary skaters. And you find that those type of things when you play around with the models and you use the tools.
Yeah, one thing that I really like about this tool is it shows their line right here as well. So as you can see, Jamie Benn is on the first line, the first power play. But if you look down here, Andre Palat is on the first line, but he's on the second power play. So it shows you if these guys correlate together on lines and on their power play right here, which is really valuable. And one thing kind of speaking to goalie, the correlation in general is really high when playing goaltender in your stacks and in your grouping. So let's try one with a goalie here. Let's just go back to center, wing, D, and then add in a goalie too. So 4-person stack. This could be rolled out in probably GPPs primarily, but let's take out the center part of it actually and just do a 3-player stack, see what happens with goaltender. And I guess we're not going to get it.
Looks like it's not going up with the goalie stack.
Anyways, let's just go look at the correlations for it then, because it's something that even in San Jose, so like you're playing a good amount of Brent Burns, it's not always a bad idea to use Martin Jones. So the correlations here, you can see, so looking at Martin Jones and his correlation, so he's popping kind of with some of those guys that play on the top unit that play a lot of minutes. So he's got a 19% correlation with Brent Burns. So it could be something to consider playing Burns with Martin Jones.
Yeah, and it goes to a game theory thought, and here's the game theory portion of our show today. So in order for someone like Martin Jones to win, they need to score goals. And in order for them to score goals, players on their team are getting points. So if you're thinking about, for GPP purposes, playing a goalie on, let's say, a really chalky team tomorrow, San Jose, which it should be, So let's say you want to play Martin Jones, but you want to fade all of the San Jose skaters in a GPP. Well, it's going to be really difficult for you to win a GPP because how is your goalie supposed to get a win without them scoring any goals? So a lot of the time you're going to expect, if you're playing a goalie, you're expecting them to win. Generally, they'll score 3 or 4 goals. Well, if you play Martin Jones and you fade the San Jose team, and yet they score 3 or 4 goals, well, you're probably not going to be in very good shape in that GPP because you're looking at guys like Brent Burns, Logan Couture, Joe Pavelski, who are going to eat up those points, and people are going to have played both of them and stacked the goalie. So it's a game theory question is if you're playing guys from a team, a lot of the time in tournaments, you want to attack the goalie with them.
Yeah, definitely. That's really good information. If you have to kind of rewind and listen to that again, I would definitely recommend you do that. But I mean, I think we can kind of end it there, Sean, unless you have any other thoughts kind of on the slate.
No, I think tomorrow's slate should be a fun one. Hopefully everything pans out for everybody, and I hope we're helping you guys. If you guys have any questions for us or if you have any ideas for these shows, I believe we're going to be popping them out every Thursday afternoon. They should be showing up. So if you ever have any ideas or you want to see some different things, make sure you hit us up on Twitter, and we would be happy to implement things if you have good ideas because we only know what we can think about. So if you guys have any great ideas, I'm sure we'll be reading through them. And if we see something, we'll try to implement that in the show as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thanks for listening. This was definitely a good time. It was our second show of the week with the NBA All-Star Game. But going forward, like Sean said, we're shooting for every Thursday NHL slate. So thanks in advance for that feedback. Just excited to do more of these for you guys in the second half of the NFL season. And please send any of your thoughts in general to FantasyLabs NHL on Twitter. And then you can also throw anything at our individual Twitter handles as well. You can find me at Joe Holka, and then you can find Sean at PSUFans2. So thanks for listening. Good luck on the Saturday slate, and we'll talk to you guys soon.